When I was around 9 years old, my mom, my little sister, and I lived in a small house located in a quiet town. The street was generally safe, a place where kids would ride their bikes outside during the summer. But even back then, there were things about that house that didn't feel right. My mom used to say it was just old. And old houses make noises, of course. But some of the things I remember from that time didn't sound like normal house noises. They sounded like something else. It's something I still don't really know how to explain. It all started one night when I couldn't sleep. Lying in my bed, I had the blanket pulled up to my chin as I stared at the little glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling. My room wasn't very big, it just had a bed, a dresser, and a toy chest near the window. I remember watching the shadows on the wall cast by the trees outside. Whenever the wind blew, the branches would sway, and I told myself that's all I was seeing. But then I noticed one shadow down low in the corner near my toy chest that wasn't moving like the others. At first, I thought it was just a pile of clothes or one of my bigger stuffed animals. I almost laughed at myself for being a scared kid, but then I blinked and the shadow was gone. I remember feeling a coldness, the kind that comes from inside your body, not from the air. I pulled the blanket over my head and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I didn't even think about it until I noticed my toy chest. It was standing open, as if someone had been looking inside. I never left it open because my mom would yell if toys spilled out. I just closed it and didn't say a word. A few weeks later, my sister, who was only 5, told my mom she didn't like the man in the closet. I basically froze when she said it because she was so casual, stating it as if it were just a fact. My mom brushed it off, saying, "Little kids imagine things." But I saw my sister's face, and I could tell she wasn't making it up. She said he would stand in the closet at night and whisper, though she couldn't hear the words. My mom talked to her that night and said a prayer with her, but she didn't check the closet. Later that night, I woke up because I heard something dragging across my floor, a sound like someone pulling their nails across the wood. I was too scared to move, but the sound stopped right by my bed. I was sure that if I looked over the side, I'd see something staring up at me. I just froze there, clutching the blanket until I fell asleep again. The next morning, there were long, fresh scratches on the floor right by the side of my bed, as if someone had just carved into the wood. I remember running to show my mom, but she got angry. She said I must have been playing with something sharp or dragging furniture. I swore I hadn't, but she didn't believe me. After that, the nights got worse. I would hear faint whispers, almost like a radio on low volume, coming from my closet. Sometimes my sister would cry in her room, and when I ran in, she would be pointing at a corner, saying, "He's there. He's there." I never saw him, but I believed her. You know that feeling when someone's watching you and the hairs on your arms stand up? That's how it felt. The scariest night was in the middle of winter. I woke up and saw my bedroom door was open, even though I always shut it. I could see the hallway light because my mom left one on for us at night. But then, as I watched, the light in the hall went out. I thought maybe the bulb had burned out. Then I heard footsteps coming down the hall. They stopped right outside my door. I wanted to scream for my mom, but nothing came out. The door creaked, and I saw a tall, dark shape lean in, just its head poking into the room. I shut my eyes and pretended to be asleep. When I opened them again, the door was closed and I was alone. In the morning, I asked my mom if she had come into my room. She said no, she had been asleep all night. My sister said she saw the man again, this time standing by her bed. We told my mom together, and she finally looked worried. She lit a candle and said a prayer in each room of the house. Things were quiet for a little while after that, but it didn't last. One afternoon, I came home from school before my mom. I was sitting on the couch doing homework when I heard the sound of the toy chest in my room slam shut. The thing is, nobody else was home. I hoped it was just the wind, but when I walked down the hall, I saw my bedroom door was wide open. My toy chest was closed, but all my toys were scattered on the floor like someone had dumped them out. I backed away and waited outside until my mom came home. When I told her, she still didn't believe me, suggesting the cat had knocked things over. Years later, after we moved out, I asked my mom if she had ever experienced anything in that house. She hesitated, then said yes. She said sometimes she would wake up and see a shadow standing in her doorway. She told me she never said anything because she didn't want to scare us, but she admitted she believed there was something wrong with that house. She thought it was a man, someone who used to live there. She never said much more, but I know what I saw, and I know what my sister saw, too. Even now as an adult, thinking about that time makes me feel sick in my stomach. It wasn't imagination. It was something real, and it wanted us to know it was there. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I still hear the sound of nails dragging across the floor. When I was 10, my family moved into a bigger house because my mom had just gotten remarried and we needed more space. The house was nice, newer than our last one, and it was in a quiet neighborhood with a lot of trees. I thought I would be happy there. At first, everything seemed normal, but then little things started happening that made me feel like the house wasn't right. My bedroom was at the end of the hall. It had 2 big windows that faced the backyard and a closet that was deeper than my old one. I liked it until the first night I slept there. I woke up around midnight hearing something moving in the closet. It wasn't loud, just a soft shuffling like clothes being brushed against. Staring at the closet, I told myself it was just the house settling. I know it sounds cliché, but most people, even children, assume small sounds in a house are just typical noises you hear every day. But then I saw the door move. It didn't swing open, but it shivered, as if someone had lightly pressed on it from the inside. I wanted to run to my mom's room, but I was frozen. I stayed that way, still staring at the closet, until I fell back asleep. The next morning, the closet door was cracked open just a little, even though I had shut it tight. I asked my mom if she had gone in there, and she said no. She said maybe the air vents pushed it, but I knew it wasn't the air vents. The nights after that got worse. I started hearing tapping on the window glass. At first, I thought it was tree branches, but when I looked, there were no branches near the window. The tapping would go on for minutes, and it would stop only when I pulled the blanket over my head. I tried to ignore it until one night I finally peeked out. I saw a pale hand pressed against the window. It was on the outside, but the window was on the 2nd floor, way too high for anyone to reach without a ladder. The hand stayed there for a long time, just pressed against the glass without moving. Then it slid down slowly and disappeared. I didn't sleep at all that night. I told my mom, and she started cracking up laughing when I did. She didn't believe me for a second. When she saw that I wasn't joking, she leaned more into trying to convince me that I was probably half asleep and seeing things from my dream. But I knew that was a load of horseshit. My stepdad didn't believe me either. He said I was making it up for attention, and he also got a laugh out of it. But I started noticing he kept the hallway light on at night. So maybe he didn't feel as safe as he pretended. A month later, my little brother, who was 4, started talking about the white lady. He would say she came into his room and sat on his bed. My mom thought it was just his imagination. But one night, I heard him screaming. I ran in and saw him curled up under his blanket, crying. When he finally calmed down, he said the white lady had been standing by his door, just staring at him. He said her eyes were all black. I believed him because of what I had seen at my window. I started sleeping with the blanket over my head every night. But that didn't stop the dreams. I began to dream of the white lady, too. She would stand in the corner of my room and whisper my name. Her voice was dry, like leaves rubbing together. Sometimes I would wake up and still hear it, faint, but definitely real. One night, I woke up and saw her standing at the foot of my bed. She was taller than anyone I had ever seen, her head almost touching the ceiling. She wore a long white dress that moved even though the air was still. Her hair was black and stringy, and her face was pale like chalk. Her eyes were like empty black holes. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I shut my eyes, and when I opened them again, she was gone. But my closet door was wide open. After that, I couldn't go in my closet anymore. I begged my mom to let me sleep in her room, but she said I needed to learn how to be brave. I think she didn't want to admit she was scared, too. The worst night came during a storm. There was heavy rain and loud wind. I woke up to the sound of my window creaking. When I looked, the window was slowly sliding open. Even though it was locked, I could see the lock turning by itself. The window opened all the way and I saw the white lady climb in. She didn't move like a person, she floated. Her feet never touched the floor. She drifted toward my bed and leaned down until her face was right in front of mine. I felt her cold breath on my skin. She whispered my name again, and this time I screamed as loud as I could. My mom and stepdad came running in, but when they turned on the light, the window was closed and locked, and no one else was there. They yelled at me for scaring everyone, but I could see the worry in their faces. The weird thing about that part of the story is that I don't vividly remember what happened between the moment I saw that lady floating towards me and my screaming. The best I can explain it is that I sort of blacked out for a moment before remembering screaming and having my parents rush into the room. My window was closed again, which would suggest to people that it was just a night terror. That's what my parents believed it was. I think my mom started taking me to therapy for a while because they were worried. We lived in that house for 3 more years and I never got used to it. My brother stopped talking about the white lady, but I think it was because he was too scared, not because she stopped visiting. Sometimes I would hear him crying at night and saying, "Go away." I think he also didn't want to be forced into going to therapy. Sometimes when it storms at night, I still get scared to even get up to go to the bathroom or get water. I'll glance over at corners of the room, making sure I don't see something tall lurking there. It goes to show how these kinds of things stick with you into adulthood. I'd be more open to believing it was simply night terrors if it weren't for the fact that I saw that hand on my window before my little brother even first mentioned the white lady. I guess this is just one of those freakish experiences that cannot be explained. When I was 8, I rode my bike every day after school. I lived on a quiet street with small houses and big trees. I learned every crack in the sidewalk and where the mailman stopped. One house I liked was down the block. To get a view of the yard, I had to ride near the corner of the block. There was a long driveway and a wide lawn. An older man stood in that driveway most afternoons. He'd always wear a hat, and he'd stand where the driveway met the sidewalk, looking down the street. When I rode by, he would say hi. He never came onto the sidewalk. He never stepped off his driveway. He would call out and wave and then go back to watching his yard. I always waved back. My mother told me to never cross the street by myself, so I never crossed to actually speak to the man face to face. And the man knew that. From his place, he would call to me and ask about school. He would ask about my bike. He asked if I liked the bell on my new red bike. I even remember once he told me a joke about a cat that made me laugh. For weeks we talked like that. The conversations were short, always from his driveway to the curb. He seemed to know small things about me without me saying them. For example, the fact that I had a little brother or that my dad got a new car. I never told him these things. I thought maybe he had just seen us from down the block, a neighbor who watched the street. One day, I got a brand new bike. It was red with a shiny bell, like I mentioned before. I rode down the block slow and he called out, "Nice bike." He asked if I wanted to race to the corner. I told him no because my mom would be angry. He smiled and said, "One day." After that, we talked about small things. He told me about a bird that liked his fence, about a rule against stepping on a certain stone, and then a story about a dog that would always bring a slipper back. He sounded like someone who had time to watch small things. I started looking for him when I was on my bike. Some afternoons he was there and sometimes he wasn't. Then one week, he stopped coming out. Riding down the block past the house, I saw no one standing there. The curtains in the front window were closed. I slowed down and looked at the driveway, and it felt kind of weird not seeing the man there. I wanted to ask my mother if I could cross the street. She said no, explaining the road was not for unsupervised kids. Anyway, a few days later, I saw a woman in the backyard of that house. I had never seen anyone in that yard before. To see her, I had to ride around the corner. She had her hair tied back and she held a watering can, so I assumed she was watering flowers back there. I stopped my bike down the street so she would not see me too close. I wanted to call across the road like I always did, but I didn't. I don't know if I was too shy or scared of what my mother would say if I stayed out too late. The woman didn't seem to notice me. A few days later, I rode by again, and the woman was on the back porch with a mug in her hands. I sat on my bike and watched for a bit. Then she opened a small side door and went around the house. I pedaled slowly to the corner and waited where the sidewalk curved. I looked down the block to ensure my mom wasn't outside. Then I decided I would quickly cross the street. I pushed my pedals and crossed like my life depended on it. The house looked bigger from up close. The driveway was long and sloped down to the road. I felt like I wasn't allowed to be there. I stopped at the end of the driveway near the back gate. The woman heard me. She turned and saw a small boy with a red bike standing at the gate. She looked surprised but not angry. Coming to the gate and opening it, she asked what I was doing back there. I told her about the man on the driveway who used to say hi when I biked past. I told her he knew my name and that he said he would race me one day. She wiped her hands on her dress like she had been working and then said the man I described sounded like her husband. I smiled, thinking she would say he was on a trip or inside, but she didn't smile. She said he had died the year before. She said he died in his chair. His name was Harold. I felt a cold space open in my chest. I asked her if she had a picture. I wanted to see him. She went inside and returned with a small frame. The photograph showed a man with the same hat and the same broad smile. He actually bore a resemblance to the man I'd always seen. Then the woman said the photo was new, taken only a couple of years ago. She said her husband had a scar across his cheek since he was young. Looking at the photo closely, I saw the man had a thin, pale scar from ear to mouth. I remembered the man on the driveway. He had no scar. He had a round, plain face and smooth skin. The hat matched and the smile matched, but the scar did not. I told her I once saw a mark on the man's face, but I thought he had just rubbed his cheek. She said that scar had been there for a long time, but that he'd hide it under stubble sometimes. She said again that her husband had died and that no one else lived in the house. She told me she had moved back last summer to take care of the garden and that she'd never seen or heard anyone standing in the driveway. I honestly started to get kind of scared at this point. I thanked her and backed down the driveway. I didn't look back into the yard again. I rode home slow and put the bike in the garage. The bike ride back was kind of like how when you almost get into a car accident, you drive home the rest of the way in silence with the radio off. My mom didn't ask any questions when I got home, she just told me to be careful. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about the man with the hat. I thought about his laugh and the way he said my name, and I thought about the scar in the photograph. The next day, I went by the house and the curtains were open. Sunlight touched the porch and driveway, but no one stood there. I waved from the corner, but no one waved back, so I pedaled away. For a while, nothing else happened. I tried to forget. I made new routes on my bike and talked with kids on other blocks. Weeks passed. Then one night, I woke up and heard my name. It sounded like someone outside the house near my window. The voice was familiar. It said my name the way the man across the street used to say it. I sat up fast and my head started spinning. Over the light sound of raindrops outside, I knew for a fact I was hearing my name being repeatedly called. I shouted for my mother and then threw the covers over myself, hiding. She came in a hurry and sat by the bed. I told her about the voice outside my window. She rubbed my back and told me it was the wind. To make me feel better, she went to the window and lifted the blinds. She said there wasn't anyone out there, so I went over to check myself. There was a light rain outside, but my mom was right. My father got up and checked the locks to the windows and doors. He looked outside with a flashlight, which made me feel better. They said there was no one out there. When I insisted I heard a voice, they said the most typical thing a parent would say to a scared child, that I dreamed it. The next morning, my throat hurt from shouting the night before. I told my friends at school, and they laughed at me for implying I believed in ghosts. One friend dared me to stand in the driveway of that house at night and call his name. I did not take that dare. Days passed and nothing happened, so I moved on. The years went on and the street changed. Houses sold and the woman's house stood empty for a little while. I once saw movers taking boxes out. Later on, new people were painting the front. The long driveway was still there, but it had new cars. I rode past and did not look for a man in a hat. I got older. I learned other routes and the names of new neighbors and their dogs. And eventually, at 18, I moved out for college. I never moved back to that house because my parents sold it while I was in college. But the memory of that man sits like a small stone in my chest. I wonder why I didn't ask the woman for more pictures or press her for more details. I guess in that moment I was scared to wonder if I'd been talking to a ghost. I didn't cross that street again for a long time. I told the story to 1 or 2 people later in life, and they even asked why I didn't go back and ask that woman more or tell her everything I remembered. Maybe they were right. Maybe I should have been braver. Maybe I should have asked more questions about the scar or asked to see a wedding photo, but I was 8. I wasn't really thinking that way. A few years ago, I drove down the block just for the hell of it. A child was riding a bike near the corner. The driveway was empty. For a moment, I wanted to stop. I wanted to ask if anyone had stood there and said hi. I wanted to know if anyone else had heard a voice in the rain. I wanted a small answer that would close the gap. But I didn't stop. I just kept driving. The memory stays as it was, and I try my best to suppress it these days. That feeling, the one of being watched, it never really leaves you. It just finds a quiet corner in the back of your mind and settles in. You learn to live with it, to ignore the occasional chill on a warm day or the way your heart jumps when a floorboard creaks in the night. You tell yourself it's just your imagination, that you're an adult now, and adults don't believe in such things. But then something small will happen, something so insignificant that anyone else would dismiss it, and that old, cold feeling rushes right back. It was about 5 years after I'd moved out for college. I was living in my first apartment, a small, modern place on the 3rd floor. It was brand new, all clean lines and neutral paint, with no history that I knew of. I felt safe there. One Tuesday night, I was washing dishes after dinner. The kitchen window was above the sink, looking out into a dark, quiet courtyard. The water was running, and I was scrubbing a pan, not really thinking about anything. Then, I heard it. Faint, but clear. A child's laugh. It was a happy sound, but it made my blood run cold. Because it was coming from just outside the window. I turned off the water, my hands wet and soapy. The silence was sudden and heavy. My heart was pounding. I told myself it was a TV from a neighboring apartment, or kids playing outside the building. But the courtyard was enclosed, and it was a school night, late. And the laugh had sounded so close, right on the other side of the glass. I forced myself to look. I leaned over the sink and peered out the window. The courtyard was empty, lit only by a single security light. Nothing moved. I stood there for a full minute, staring into the darkness, seeing nothing. I was about to chalk it up to my own tired mind when I saw it. A flicker of movement in the deep shadow under a tree. It was low to the ground. For a second, I thought it was a cat. But then it resolved into a shape. A small, dark figure, no bigger than a child, darting from the shadow of one tree to another. It moved too fast, a blur that vanished before my eyes could fully focus. There was no sound of footsteps on the gravel, no rustling of leaves. Just silence. I backed away from the sink, my hand shaking. I checked the lock on the apartment door, then went and sat on the couch in the living room, leaving all the lights on. I tried to watch TV, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind was back in that house with the scratching sounds, with my sister pointing at the corner, with a white lady at the foot of my bed. The rational part of my brain fought back. You're stressed from work. You're projecting. It was a trick of the light. But the feeling in my gut, that primal, icy dread, told me otherwise. It felt like a reminder. A message. That these things, whatever they are, aren't tied to a single house or a single street. They're just elsewhere. And sometimes, you cross paths. A few weeks later, I was on the phone with my sister. We don't talk about the old house much, it's an unspoken agreement. But that night, I felt compelled to ask. I tried to sound casual. Hey, do you ever think about that house we lived in when we were kids? The one with the toy chest. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing. Finally, she said, "Why are you asking me that?" "No reason," I said, too quickly. "Just something made me think of it recently." Another pause. Then, her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "My daughter, she's 4 now. Last week, she told me she doesn't like the man who stands in the hallway at night. She said he wears a hat. I felt the air leave my lungs. I couldn't speak." She described him, my sister continued, her voice trembling slightly. She said he has a nice smile, but he has no detail on his face. She said it's smooth. Like it's unfinished. We didn't say anything else about it. We changed the subject to something safe, like our jobs. But the damage was done. The gap wasn't closed, it was ripped wide open. It wasn't just my memory. It wasn't just in that one house. It was something that had, in some way, followed us. Or maybe it had always been there, waiting for us to notice it again. So now, I live my life. I go to work, I pay my bills, I see my friends. I am a functional adult. But I never, ever sleep with the closet door open. I keep a light on in the hallway. And when I hear a noise I can't explain, I don't investigate. I just lie still, and I wait for it to pass. Because I know now that bravery isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid, and continuing to live your life anyway, with the certain knowledge that there are things in this world that we will never, ever understand. And sometimes, they know our names.